Welcome back to Real Crime Stories, the podcast where we bring you crime stories from around the world. The neighborhood on Lancaster Boulevard was silent that night. Street lights flickered over parked cars, and the distant hum of the highway was the only sound disturbing the stillness. Inside a small apartment, however, something was terribly wrong. A light remained on long after midnight. Neighbors would later recall faint noises, a dull thud, a muffled cry, before everything went quiet. Hours later, a lone figure slipped out into the darkness, dragging something heavy behind him. His movements were quick and deliberate, as if rehearsed. By sunrise, the apartment that had once echoed with the laughter of 3 young children stood unnervingly still. The curtains were drawn, the door was locked, and the woman who had spent years fighting to protect herself and her sons had vanished. What happened inside that home during the early hours of August 10th would soon unravel into one of Lancaster's most haunting cases. A story of control, fear, and the final desperate act of a man who refused to let go. Sheila Lizbeth Cabrera came to the United States carrying the same hope shared by millions who leave everything behind, the promise of safety, stability, and a better life for her children. Leaving Peru was not just a move, it was a leap of faith. At 33, Sheila had built a modest but loving life in Lancaster, California. She was a devoted mother to 3 young boys and worked tirelessly to provide for them. Friends described her as warm, generous, and resilient, the kind of woman who helped others even while quietly carrying her own pain. Behind closed doors, that pain was rooted in fear. Her husband, Josimar Cabrera, appeared caring in public, but Sheila's reality was far darker. Years earlier, she had reported him for abuse in Peru. The violence followed her to California. Friends noticed her growing exhaustion, the way her brightness slowly dimmed. She confided that she felt trapped, terrified that if she tried to leave, he would take her children from her. By the summer of 2025, Sheila had reached her breaking point. She began planning her escape, saving money, speaking quietly with trusted friends, preparing to involve the authorities. On August 9th, she called her parents in Peru and told them she was ready to leave and go to the police. Her voice carried fear, but also hope. It was the last time they would ever hear from her. Inside the apartment, Josimar knew control was slipping away. To him, losing Sheila meant losing everything, and if he could not have her, no one would. In the early hours of August 10th, while their children slept nearby, prosecutors alleged that Josimar Cabrera murdered his wife inside their home. Investigators later described the violence as deliberate and brutal, a crime that shattered a family and left a community searching for answers. This was not a sudden argument or a moment of uncontrollable rage. It was cold and calculated. By morning, the small apartment that had once been filled with laughter had fallen completely silent. The children woke to a world forever altered, and a community that admired Sheila for her strength and kindness would soon be mourning a woman who had spent her final days fighting for freedom. Inside the apartment on Lancaster Boulevard, 3 young boys slept peacefully in their beds, unaware that everything they knew was collapsing around them. They didn't hear the struggle. They didn't see the violence. In another room, their father, the man who had once promised to protect them, was taking their mother's life. The walls that had once held bedtime stories and laughter now absorbed only silence and unthinkable cruelty. When it was over, Josimar Cabrera turned his attention not to panic, but to control. The man who had ruled his wife through fear for years now focused on controlling what came next. Investigators would later say what followed was not chaos, but a disturbing display of order. He wrapped Sheila's body in a large piece of fabric, folding it tightly and securing it to conceal what he had done. That same fabric would later become critical evidence, matching material seen in surveillance footage that would ultimately break the case wide open. He moved deliberately, not like someone reacting to an impulsive act, but like a man following a plan. Neighbors later recalled faint sounds in the early morning hours, doors closing, something heavy being dragged, then the low rumble of a car engine cutting through the quiet. In that still neighborhood, even the smallest noise carried. Around 2:40 a.m., a neighbor returning home from a night shift noticed something strange. The complex was dark and silent, but one man was awake. Sheila Cabrera stood beside his silver sedan, carefully cleaning the trunk. The sight made her pause. At that hour, there was no reason for anyone to be doing that. What she didn't know was that she was witnessing the beginning of a cover-up. Hours later, detectives recovered footage from a nearby Ring doorbell camera. In a grainy black-and-white video, time-stamped just after 4 a.m., a figure could be seen dragging a large, heavy bundle wrapped in fabric across the pavement. The strain in his movements, the effort it took to lift the weight was unmistakable. That bundle was Sheila Cabrera. The footage would become the centerpiece of the homicide investigation, cold, irrefutable proof of the final betrayal. Moments later, the man forced the bundle into the trunk, closed it, climbed behind the wheel, and drove away into the darkness. His route led him out of Lancaster and into the winding roads of the Angeles National Forest, a vast stretch of rugged wilderness known for its isolation. By day, it is a place of quiet beauty. By night, it has too often served as a dumping ground for violent crimes. Deep inside the forest, hidden from view, Sheila stopped. The early morning air was cold and still. No headlights passed. No witnesses watched. He opened the trunk, dragged Sheila's body to the edge of a steep embankment, and pushed her over. She tumbled down through rocks and brush, disappearing into the darkness below. The mother of his 3 children was abandoned like something discarded. Afterward, Sheila drove home. Inside the apartment, the boys were still asleep, unaware their mother would never return. By morning, he began preparing his next act, the lies. 2 days later, on August 12, 2025, Sheila's friends became desperate. No calls, no messages, no activity of any kind. That silence was unlike her. Sheila never vanished without telling someone, especially when her children were involved. Fearing the worst, her friends went to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department to file a missing person report. Deputies were sent to the apartment. Sheila answered the door calmly, politely, cooperatively. But as questioning continued, his story began to unravel. First, he claimed Sheila had been detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, a calculated lie designed to exploit fear and delay scrutiny. When detectives pressed for details, his story changed again. And with each lie, the truth drew closer. Now, he claimed, Sheila had left him for another man. Then came a third version, an accident, though he could offer no details, no location, no witnesses, no report. Each story contradicted the last, and every explanation collapsed under the most basic questioning. Detectives quickly understood they were not speaking to a worried husband. They were speaking to a man trying to outrun the truth. As the investigation deepened, Sheila Cabrera's friends stepped forward with crucial information. They described years of domestic abuse, repeated pleas for help, and the constant fear Sheila lived with. They told detectives she had been planning to leave her husband and that Josimar had threatened to take the children if she ever tried. The image of a devoted family man began to disintegrate. With his shifting stories and the mounting testimonies, investigators realized this was no longer a missing person case. It was a homicide waiting to be proven. Detectives began working every angle. Phone records were pulled, traffic cameras reviewed, security footage from around the Lancaster apartment complex was collected. Then, on August 13th, just 3 days after Sheila disappeared, the case broke open. A neighbor's Ring doorbell camera had captured footage from the early morning hours of August 10th. In it, Josemar Cabrera could be seen dragging a large, heavy object wrapped in fabric across the ground, struggling with its weight before forcing it into the trunk of his car. That brief clip changed everything. What had begun as a missing person report instantly became a murder investigation. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Homicide Bureau took over, coordinating with specialized search and rescue teams from Crescenta Valley, Altadena, and Montrose. Their mission was daunting: search more than 700,000 acres of the Angeles National Forest, an unforgiving landscape of steep canyons, cliffs, and dense brush. Finding a body there would be like searching for a single grain of sand in a desert. As the search expanded, the urgency intensified. Josemar and the couple's 3 young children were now missing. Working with the Mexican and Peruvian consulates, U.S. authorities issued international alerts, fearing he had already fled the country. Investigators believed he was moving south, possibly toward Peru. Then, on the morning of August 16th, just after 10 a.m., the call every investigator both hopes for and dreads came in. Members of the Montrose Mountain Search and Rescue Team had spotted something down a steep embankment deep in the forest, a bundle of fabric that looked disturbingly familiar. Homicide detectives climbed down through the brush. There, among the rocks, wrapped in material matching what was seen on surveillance footage, lay the body of 33-year-old Sheila Cabrera. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The discovery confirmed the darkest fear investigators had held from the beginning. The news rippled quickly through Lancaster's Peruvian community. Candlelight vigils formed almost immediately. People brought flowers, photographs, and handwritten notes honoring a woman who had come to the United States chasing safety and a better life for her children, only to lose her life to the man she trusted most. That same day, investigators received word from Peru. The 3 Cabrera children had been located and placed in protective custody. They were alive, but their mother was gone, and their father was now an international fugitive. That evening, dozens gathered outside Lancaster City Hall. Candles flickered in the darkness. Signs read "Justice for Sheila," and not one more. Faces glowed with grief and anger as the community mourned a mother, a friend, and a neighbor who had given so much of herself to others. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Josemar Cabrera was on the run, moving through Peru trying to stay ahead of the law. But investigators were closing in. The same technology, persistence, and international cooperation that had exposed his crime would soon bring him face to face with justice. After fleeing the United States, Josemar crossed multiple borders in a desperate bid for freedom. He was detained not once, but twice, first in Mexico and later in Peru. Both times, Josemar traveled by land, attempting to stay one step ahead of the authorities. And both times, despite being questioned, he was released. U.S. prosecutors had not yet filed formal charges, leaving foreign governments with no legal grounds to hold him. For investigators, it was an agonizing delay. They already knew who was responsible for Sheila's death, but the law had not yet caught up. When Josemar finally arrived at Jorge Chavez International Airport in Lima, Peruvian authorities were waiting. He was stopped and questioned, and the 3 young children traveling with him were immediately taken into protective custody. Still, without filed U.S. charges or an active extradition request, Peruvian police had no authority to detain him. The man suspected of murdering his wife walked free, while his children were handed over to child welfare officials. In the days that followed, outrage spread across both the United States and Peru. Sheila's story dominated social media and news coverage, with many asking how a suspected killer could move freely while a family mourned. The Peruvian Foreign Ministry, working alongside U.S. consular officials, moved swiftly to protect the children. Within days, the 3 boys were flown out of Lima, routed through Mexico City, and returned to Los Angeles. There, they were reunited with their maternal grandmother, Helga Rosillo. For Helga, the reunion was bittersweet. Her grandsons were safe, but her daughter was gone forever. Back in California, prosecutors were moving with urgency. Detectives from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Homicide Bureau compiled hundreds of pages of evidence, surveillance footage, witness statements, forensic findings from the apartment, and documentation of Sheila's history of domestic abuse. On August 21st, the case file was formally presented to the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. Later that same day, prosecutors announced the filing of charges. Josemar Cabrera was charged with 1 count of murder, along with a special allegation that a knife had been used as a deadly weapon. The following morning, an international extradition warrant was issued. Interpol was notified, and a red notice, an international wanted alert, was circulated worldwide, officially identifying Josemar as a fugitive accused of homicide. The case became a top priority for both the U.S. Department of Justice and the Peruvian National Police. An intensive manhunt followed. Authorities tracked movements along the Pan American Highway, monitored hotels and transit hubs, and maintained close coordination with Interpol offices in Mexico and the United States. For nearly 2 weeks, Josemar remained on the run, but with the red notice active, every step became more dangerous. His face was now circulating through international databases, border alerts, and media outlets across 2 continents. Investigators believe the pressure left him with nowhere left to hide. On August 27, 2025, Josemar Cabrera surrendered. He walked into Interpol headquarters in Lima and turned himself in. Footage released by Peruvian National Police showed him in handcuffs, dressed in a black Interpol shirt, flanked by officers. His expression was blank, his head lowered. The flight was over. According to Peruvian officials, Josemar will remain in custody in Lima as the extradition process moves forward, a procedure that can take months, involving court hearings and diplomatic review. Once approved, he will be returned to California to stand trial for the murder of Sheila Cabrera. If convicted, he faces a maximum sentence of 26 years to life in prison. For Sheila's family, the road to justice is far from finished, but after months of fear, searching, and heartbreak, there is finally hope. Hope that the man who ended her life will be held accountable. Justice for Sheila Lizbeth Cabrera has begun its long journey home, a journey fueled by the love of a mother who came to America seeking peace, and by a community that refuses to let her story be forgotten. Thank you for listening to Real Crimes. Share your thoughts on the story, like and subscribe to the channel. Until the next episode, stay tuned.